welcome and thank you all here to the webinar. Just briefly to go over the agenda, there'll be welcome and objectives, an overview of the Broadband for All Digital Equity and BEAD Planning, calls to action. Gonna really talk through a couple ways that we're seeking assistance and partnership from the California ISP ecosystem. And then as Ann mentioned, that at the end, we will open up to question and answer. We'll try to answer some questions throughout the presentation in the chat if we can. If not, we request that we wait until the end to do all the questions. So next slide, please. And I want to go back and just again introduce myself. My name is Scott Adams. I'm the Deputy Director of Broadband and Digital Literacy at the California Department of Technology. You know, we have invited all of the internet service providers here today. Excuse me, I'm having some technical difficulties. But we have invited the internet service providers here to reiterate our request for partnership on not just Broadband for All, but the current state digital equity and broadband equity access and deployment planning process. So we wanted to give a quick overview of the planning process. Could you please advance to the next slide? Obviously, it comes as no surprise to the folks assembled here that Californians' ability to access and use broadband is the difference between being able to fully engage in life and being cut off. Next slide, please. And as many of you know who have been active participants, partners in Broadband for All at the state, the Broadband for All program and related initiatives are really based on you know, access, affordability, and adoption. And the end goal is really, you know, for California residents and residents on tribal lands to have universal digital literacy and inclusion. Next slide. So Broadband for All, as many of you know, has been an evolving process in California since 2010 when the Broadband Council was created. That's a multi-agency body that coordinates broadband deployment and adoption throughout the state in un- and unserved communities as defined by the Public Utilities Commission. As all of us experienced during the pandemic, the persistent digital divide that we have in California was exacerbated when folks were really required to work and go to school from home, access healthcare. So in 2020, the governor issued his broadband executive order asking the Broadband Council to redouble their efforts and develop a statewide broadband action plan to really deploy at the state level all of our tools and resources to close the digital divide. That plan was developed in just 4 months with input from many of you and laid forth really a 24-point plan how to close the digital divide. The next key step in Broadband for All was in 2021 with the historic passage of Senate Bill 156. You know, big thanks to the legislature and the governor to acknowledging that, you know, additional resources needed to be allocated $6 billion to develop, you know, on one side, the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative to create a statewide open access middle mile network, and then an additional $2+ billion allocated to the PUC to augment the programs that they already had in existence through the California Advanced Service Fund to help support ISPs, new entrants, and other entities to develop last mile solutions in those hard to reach areas in the un- and underserved communities. I think the last part of you know, Broadband for All is really leveraging the IIJ broadband programs that were outlined in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. And so many of us here have been fully leveraging the Affordable Connectivity Program to help, increase affordability and increase broadband adoption rates for eligible households in California. And now, what we really wanted to talk to you about and engage you in a partnership on are the efforts to develop plans to leverage funding through the Digital Equity Act program and the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, I'm sure many of you know, both of these programs, BEAD is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program are known, and the Digital Equity Act programs represent a great opportunity for the state of California to bring additional dollars back to California to achieve broadband for all. Next slide, please. A little bit about the roles and responsibilities. So the Department of Technology is the administering entity for the Digital Equity Planning Program. The Public Utilities Commission has been designated the administering entity for the BEAD program. Both the required plans be made in order for the state to get its statutory allocation. Both processes are being done in close coordination and collaboration between the Department of Technology and the Public Utilities Commission. They require extensive statewide and local engagement and input from a whole host of ecosystem partners. ISPs very central to that partnership. And really at the end of the day, like I said, when both of these plans are complete, they'll be integrated and unlock additional dollars to achieve broadband for all. Next slide, please. So on the Digital Equity Act, I wanted to really center that all of the work that we are doing in the planning process have been directed to prioritize investments for 8 covered populations. Those called out in the Digital Equity Act are in the blue shades, and those include individuals living in covered households at or below with incomes at or below 150% of the federal poverty level, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, those with disabilities, individuals with language barriers, members of racial and ethnic minority groups, and individuals who primarily reside in rural areas. The 2 boxes you see in the bottom right-hand corner, women in the LGBTQ plus community are specifically called out as additional areas of focus, in the BEAD program, and PUC can talk a little bit about that later. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the planning process, which is underway and will extend through most of this year. We, developed really 5 components of the plan, and the first 2 are opportunities to virtually convene and participate in the process. There is a statewide planning group that has been developed, taking the member entities of the California Broadband Council and then extending that out to 22 other state entities that either provide direct services to the covered populations or have subject matter expertise on policy areas that are tied to digital equity. The next component are the outcome area working groups that we've established to bring together communities, subject matter experts, to identify digital equity barriers for the covered populations and identify strategies that could be scaled out and implemented throughout the state. The third component, given that data is really going to be important to informing the development of the plan and how funding is allocated, we're doing this sort of 2 levels of data acquisition. The first is through a statewide digital equity survey, which is intended to survey, the residents of the state. That's going to be done via phone, and then a complementary online mobile-friendly version of that to really get a granular accounting and more data from the 58 counties and really oversample the covered populations. The next type of data gathering is really from organizations and entities like ISPs, which is a requirement of the federal government that the state develop an asset inventory of available services and programs and other resources that are developing this. That's one of the things we wanted to talk to you all about. We've developed a digital equity ecosystem mapping tool for the state and local government entities, nonprofits, et cetera, and then one specifically for ISPs. The fourth component is some regional planning networks to allow all of us an opportunity to get from behind the Zoom screens and really get together in regions and communities, where the biggest impact is felt. Can issue a call to action about, enrolling your participation in those, and then statewide public engagement through a variety of means through the Broadband for All portal, monthly email updates, and individual webinars like this one. Next slide, please. This here is a timeline. This is approximate and it's subject to change because there's a lot of moving parts, but really would direct you to the right side in purple. The final state digital equity plan is going to be due at the end of November, and that's really when the National Telecommunications and Information Administration will review and approve it, and then the state will be eligible to apply for our statutory allocation of digital equity capacity grant funds. If you go backwards, sometime around August, there will be a 30-day public comment period. When you look at July, that's when we hope that all of the inputs from these various efforts will lead to the development of a draft, digital equity plan to make sure that a variety of stakeholders have an opportunity to comment on those to make sure that we got things correctly in our efforts that precede those. Next slide. Okay, I am complete with my portion. I'm going to hand it over to Rob Osborne, the Director of the Communications Division at the PUC. Rob?
Scott, I'm Rob Osborne, Director of the Communications Division, and I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'm going to just walk through a couple slides here relating to the BEAD program. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide summarizes the BEAD opportunity in general with a timeline below, but just in summary, the BEAD program provides $42.45 billion for the entire United States plus territories for last mile broadband funding, but it also includes the option, should states have money that's left over, if they've spent all the money on last mile broadband, to also fund things such as workforce development and job training, as well as additional implementing of adoption and digital equity programs. We estimate, based on sort of the current broadband map that the FCC has published and cost estimates, that we will not have that luxury to have money left over to fund other activities beyond just last mile deployment. So we estimate that the BEAD funding that we're likely to get will be going to last mile programs exclusively, but there are components of the BEAD program that are in the notice of funding opportunity that we have included in the OIR that I'll get into in a moment, that address things such as workforce development. I'm sorry that the timeline here is a little bit hard to see, but you can see at the bottom there's different dates. I think the next slide probably is a little bit easier to read in terms of timeline. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So back in July, the CPUC issued with the governor's office a letter of intent to participate in the BEAD program. We filed an application for initial planning funds, and that was a maximum of $5 million that was available to each entity. meaning in our case, California, to do planning for the 5-year action plan, the initial proposal and final proposals. And I'll get into that in a moment. We did a kickoff meeting in close cooperation with Department of Technology in October. We filed a bulk challenge with the FCC for the fabric locations. And basically what the fabric is a list of all the locations in California where broadband could conceivably be deployed. And the FCC published this list of fabric locations and said, hey, how does this look, guys? Let us know if you see any problems. So we went through all the locations. There's over 12 million locations in California, and identified about 46,000 locations that were either mislabeled or missing. This FCC subsequently came back to us and said, well, we've added 16,000 locations to the state based on your challenge. And I believe they might have recategorized some other locations that we identified. And that came out in their Fabric version 2, which was published in, I believe, in December. The FCC published an updated map. Actually, I take that back. It was not December. It was prior to that, because the FCC published an updated map in November, late November, with broadband availability at the location level. And then at that point, they opened up the next step of their challenge process, which they called the availability challenge. And that's what we see down here in November 18th. FCC publishes availability map. So each entity and the public had an opportunity to challenge the availability data with a deadline of January 13th. So in between that challenge opening and January 13th, we received our final initial planning funds award in December. And we also submitted an availability challenge. We are still working through that availability challenge with the FCC, with their mapping staff. So it's still a work in progress. But just on the mapping front, I'm going to jump ahead to the bottom of the slide here in bold, where it says FCC publishes final map May 15th. That date is still set as far as I know. The FCC will then essentially be freezing the map based on where it stands at that point, so that the NTIA will be able to make allocation decisions for each entity. At this point, it's unclear how much money we expect to get. Initial estimates said we would be getting around $4 billion, but I believe that's way overstated based on the map that we had seen coming out in November. We're thinking more along the lines of 900 million to possibly $1 billion, and we'll be happy if it's more than that. And we're definitely working to try and maximize the amount of money coming to California based on the most accurate map possible. So the next step after the allocation, which will be done before June 30th, is the 5-year action plan. Really, the 5-year action plan is a strategic document that's really looking, it's a high-level strategy document looking at closing the digital divide and ensuring equity. So it incorporates the digital equity plan that Scott mentioned earlier, and that's a key part of this 5-year action plan. This is due 270 days after our initial planning funds award, which puts the date around mid-August of this year. During that time, before we submit that plan, are these critical engagements, the local and regional outreach and public comment. So we have 20 events planned. I believe some of those dates have been made public already, and we are going to be starting those pretty shortly, where we will be also talking about not only digital equity, but the BEAD program. The NTIA plans to make the BEAD allocations, and then the first 20% of money will be made available upon approval of an initial proposal, which is due 180 days after the allocation. So the allocation, again, if we're expecting in June 30th to have an allocation announcement, we go 180 days out. That puts us at the end of December. So what's the difference between the initial proposal and the 5-year action plan? Well, the initial proposal describes the competitive process that the PUC will be using to select subgrantees to build broadband. And the initial proposal has to be made available for public comment, and it must incorporate local coordination feedback and be approved by the NTIA secretary, so National Telecommunications and Information Administration Secretary. That, once it's approved, will release 20% of the allocation that was announced in June. Following that is what's called the final proposal, and that will describe how the PUC is complying with the initial proposal and the results of its processes. And like the initial proposal, the final proposal must also be made available for public comment prior to submission to the NTIA for approval. And that is due 12 months after approval of the initial proposal. So everything sort of builds off of the previous deliverable. And I realize that this is a ton of information to be providing to you on a Friday afternoon. So I believe we'll be making these slides available to you and certainly be available for questions. I think I'm going to stop there and hand it back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Rob. Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can, Scott.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks, Ann. So on the calls to action, there are multiple calls to action. So Ann, if you would advance to the next slide, please. So the first is that we had discussed the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool for ISPs, and it's critical that the NTIA has made requirements of states to gather certain information and develop an asset inventory. And going to introduce Preston Ray to walk through the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool. Preston.
Thanks, Scott. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Preston Ray. I'm a director at HRNA Advisors, which is a part of the Broadband Equity Partnership. We are supporting CDT in implementing both the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative as well as the state's digital equity planning process. I myself have over a decade of experience in the broadband industry, including 6 years at an ISP in San Francisco called Monkey Brains, and close to 4 years at a think tank in DC called the Open Technology Institute. And I started my career at a content delivery network startup in China. So I'm happy to keep supporting this work here in California with this historic investment. So the state of California is using two tools to meet federal and state obligations for the state digital equity plan that we're going to talk about today, as well as the BEAD Five-Year Action Plan. The first tool we're going to talk about is the Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping Tool, or the DEEM tool, tailored specifically for internet service providers. Can you move to the next slide, please? The DEEM tool is live right now. It tracks digital equity programming and barriers to achieving digital equity in California. And we're going to walk through that in a minute or two to show how ISPs can help the state map what's going on with digital equity in California. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So the DEEM tool for ISP is going to help the state achieve a few objectives for digital equity planning and for the BEAD Five-Year Action Plan. It's going to inform infrastructure building and digital equity interventions by building on the existing ecosystem in California and addressing the gaps that exist, which we're going to help identify through the use of this tool. DEEM is important for statutory requirements that the state has in order to deliver the BEAD Five-Year Action Plan and the Digital Equity Plan. And it's important as well to utilize ISP innovations to inform the ecosystem map that we're producing. We'd like to encourage ISP participation in the DEEM tool and for you to share it with your communities through the link that was just posted there in the chat. And you can also see it here. You can go ahead and click on that link in the chat, go ahead and have it open to walk through with me right now, the DEEM tool. I'm gonna ask you to stop sharing your screen, and I'm gonna share mine to walk through the DEEM tool for ISPs. So this is the opening page of the link that you would click on and just open to talk about why it's important for ISPs to fill out the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool so we can make an accurate map. Should only take you about 10 minutes if you really think about it. So what's the name of your company? It's easy enough, fill it out. Key contact information, because we want you to be involved in the BEAD and digital equity planning process as we continue through the timeline that Scott and Rob talked about. And you can indicate the nature of your company's programs and services, geographically speaking. Some of you, of course, provide service nationwide, some of you just in parts of California. If you have further detail about your service area, you can describe that in further text here. We're going to ask if you are a participant in the Affordable Connectivity Program and in Lifeline or Intertribal Lifeline. Also, if you have any plans that are specifically targeted at low-income households, if you participate in any other subsidized or low-cost broadband programs, and to please describe what those programs are here. Also, if you have other resources or programs that support residential broadband access that you can talk about. We'd love to know what the general cost range is of subsidized programs for your offerings and how many total subscribers you have, as well as how many of them are enrolled in subsidized broadband programs. We're going to ask if you have offer a computer device subsidy program, and if you provide any access to digital skills training resources. As you can see here, you know, many of you might have partnerships with the local library or any other local social services providers. We're also going to ask about any digital equity related programs that you might offer. There's quite a few different possibilities here. And of course, we'd love to hear specifics about them. I think, yeah. So if we have specifics about the Affordable Connectivity Program, how you advertise it, and how you help people, or if you help people enroll in the ACP. We also want to understand from your perspective as ISPs, what you consider as barriers to enrollment in your programs to help people get connected. We also want to know what sources of funds support your access and affordability programs. Of course, there's a variety of possibilities. We want to know if you intend to participate in any of the last mile funding programs that the CPUC is providing, including CASF, Federal Funding Account, Loan Loss Reserve, or the local agency and tribal technical assistance programs. We want to know what your ISP's history of and capacity to receive funding is, if you participated in any granting programs and how. And if there's any fiscal sponsor that you use to secure grants, please let us know about them. And finally, if there's any additional detail that you want to provide or talk about that wasn't covered in the survey, the DEEM tool survey, you can talk about it here. And of course, there's an email specifically related to this tool that you can contact here, deem@state.ca.gov. So if I click next, it's going to complete the survey. Hurrah. And there's another quick tool I'd like to show you that's an addendum to this, which is the upload form for any files that might support your sharing of what is in the digital equity ecosystem for California that you know of or that you help support yourself. So this could be anything like a Word doc, white paper, studies that you have participated in or done. You can even upload shape files of coverage areas if you'd like to, which would be very helpful to this tool. You can be assured of anonymization. This is not part of a formal publishing that's going to directly identify every single one of your customers, but it would be very helpful for the digital equity ecosystem map of the state to understand what kind of detailed information you have about coverage. And that's those tools. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you want to continue showing the presentation. And then there's one more tool that we're going to talk about, which is a public survey, digital equity public survey, that's going to go out to households in California. Next slide, please. This survey aims to identify barriers to broadband affordability, access, and adoption. It's going to be distributed in 15 languages. It's going to have audio capability for limited literacy and visual impairment. We really want to get a deep participation from the affected populations throughout the state in order to understand their experience with barriers to access, affordability, and adoption of broadband. We really want to encourage your participation, not only in filling out the survey once it's live, it is not yet live, coming soon, but we also want you to use your channels of communication and distribution to share the survey and to communicate with your subscribers and people who follow your news releases or your communications publicly on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it might be, to talk about the importance of this survey as a tool for helping the state understand barriers to access and how to overcome them. So we'd really appreciate it if you participate both in filling out the DEEM ISP tool and sharing this digital equity public survey and filling it out once it's available. Thanks very much.
Justin, it's Scott Adams now, and wanted to really talk about the regional planning workshops that are, a component of the planning process to help engage with stakeholders across the state of California. Next slide, please. Would issue a call to action to all of you to please attend a Broadband for All Digital Equity and BEAD Planning Workshop in your area. Obviously, feedback from internet service providers is critical to developing the digital equity and BEAD plans. We really encourage you at the local level to encourage your local leaders, your subject matter experts, and relevant staff to participate in these events in the region and the communities they serve with other folks. These are going to be Big Tent gatherings that bring together, local and tribal leaders, schools, libraries, community-based organizations, philanthropic entities, etc. And, we encourage you to bring your voices and add to that expanded table. Next slide. So I already covered this. It's really a big tent. This is a non-exclusive list of folks to attend. So no, a lot of you are very community oriented and have networks. We would encourage your support in inviting the community-based organizations and other partners you have within the business community to attend these events as well. And there are some tools here in the slides that we'll share and on the Broadband for All website to support those efforts. Next slide. The confirmed workshops that we have, they're really following fast. The first two are going to be in the Central Valley in Merced and Fresno on the 14th and 15th. You can see this is a list of many of these. There's a couple more that are going to be put online. You can use the QR code and that'll take you directly to registration links to sign up. And again, we encourage you to invite, your extended networks to participate in these as well. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it back over to Rob Osborne at the PUC to issue the call to action on the BEAD OIR.
Great, thank you, Scott. Next slide, please. So I apologize, there's a lot of words on this, but again, we'll be sharing the slides. So the rulemaking process, last month, the CPUC opened an order instituting rulemaking. That's a very complicated word for saying creating program rules about the BEAD grant funding, the eligibility compliance for the BEAD funds that are going to be distributed to California. More information on that rulemaking is available on the CPUC's BEAD website, and anyone who's interested in receiving notifications on BEAD or the BEAD proceeding can sign up there. The schedule in the rulemaking that went out, the ruling, says that initial comments are due 46 days after the rulemaking was issued, which is listed as March 1st. That would put the initial comments due on the 17th, which is actually in a Monday from next. And then reply comments are due 61 days after that. So that's around, I think it's on May 2nd is when reply comments are due. The rulemaking seeks to get input on 14 questions that are included in the rulemaking. They range from determining an extremely high cost threshold, which is really at what point should the commission decide a location is too expensive, at which point it should fund only non-fiber construction. That's one issue, such as fixed wireless. Geographic level of the applications, the challenge process, ministerial review. At what threshold should the commission be able to make ministerial review of awards? A number of these sorts of issues are included in the rulemaking. So really, if you are interested in becoming a party, we have information in this slide on how to become a party to this proceeding. And I really encourage you to do that so that we can incorporate your feedback into the rulemaking. But that said, anyone who'd like to make a comment, public comment, we have a link here on how to make a comment on the rulemaking itself. But I encourage everyone to participate in this process because it helps inform, the most representative rulemaking possible for the state. So I'm going to stop there rather than dig into more of the details of the OIR, but I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to the next steps. Next slide, please. Just wanted to reiterate the calls to action. We would be very grateful for your partnership in attending and participating and bringing your expertise and your community lived organizational experiences, either at the upcoming statewide planning group or the outcome area working groups. We would really appreciate your organizations completing the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool for ISPs. Again, promoting the public survey through your customers and communities so that we can get as granular an accounting of, across all 58 counties and, from within the covered populations. The participate in the local and regional events. Really excited to get together with folks. And then, as Rob said, respond to the BEAD order instituting rulemaking. And we can go on to the next slide, which is the question and answer period. And we can take down the slides and would just ask folks that we have a number of people on the webinar today to use your raised hand function if you'd like to talk, and we'll unmute your audio and video. And given the number of folks on the webinar here, we ask you to keep your comments specific to the content and close to 2 minutes. Thank you. So are there any questions or comments? Okay. I see that Leanne Peeling.
Hey, Scott.
Hi.
So is there a deadline by which you want the information entered into the DEEM?
Yeah, great question, Leanne. As soon as possible, we tried to make it as economical from a time consideration. But by the end of May would be, a good time frame that would support us and to be able to analyze all of the data that we receive from the different entities and use that to inform the draft digital equity plan.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I see, Steph, you had a question. Would you like to give voice to that about the digital equity survey?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Steph Saavedra. I'm Noño, Pueblo, and Salagi, and I've been working with a lot of the local tribes down here in San Diego. And I just wanted to kind of paint a picture. Many of the tribes don't have reliable electricity, and even to use a phone, they have to travel, 10 to 20 miles and hope that a signal gets picked up so that they can even use emergency services. So with that being said, I'm hoping that there's some way that they would be included in any of the surveys. And I know that we're going to be working, they're working on feasibility studies, but with that, I had heard a portion of this. Someone had spoke in regards to, fiber isn't always something that is basically going to be able to be implemented within the next, couple of years. So in the meantime, putting up any type of towers or anything like that, I'm just hoping that someone would help us to mitigate the funding opportunities and also answer and be included in the surveys. And there's lots of challenges out here. So if anybody can be of assistance, we would really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Steph, thank you very much for sharing that perspective. And we know that that is very real. I put my personal email in the chat. Feel free to contact me. We'd love to work with you and other tribes where electricity and other technologies are not available, and provide paper forms of the survey so that residents on those tribal lands can have their voice be heard. I'm wondering, Rob at PUC, if you wanted to touch on the other issues.
Yes, and thank you so much for speaking up. So two programs I want to make you aware of, and I know that it doesn't help in an area where there's no electricity, but we do have two programs available. One is specifically called Tribal Technical Assistance, where we can provide funding to tribes, and we already have to, I think we've provided over 55 grants to tribes to do planning for broadband. And that could be fixed wireless, it could be fiber, it could be cable, it could be anything. And that money is available for tribes to be able to hire a consultant to start doing the initial planning. The other program that's available, and we still have money available for tribes, is local agency technical assistance. And the difference between the two is the local agency technical assistance has more money available on per grant. So I would encourage you, I can give you my contact information or Maria's. Maria's our Deputy Director of Broadband, so that we can connect you to the right people to try and take advantage of that funding. Another thing that I just wanted to suggest, following up on Scott's comment, is there's a possibility we could do an outreach event at in your area. If we could get a number of tribes together, I think that would be a win-win. So I will put my information in there as well as Maria's for you to follow up.
Thank you all very much.
Elise.
Yes. Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to ask a question. Mine is more in the future. Will the CPUC be having more meetings to go over the BEAD program and the processes that are going to be associated with that? And then in addition to that, do you guys have any idea of when the window for the grants will be opening up for planning for the ISPs?
Rob, I think that is another question for you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you, Elise.
Elise, I'm sorry, could you rephrase the first part of your question?
The brain just went bloop. Sorry. The first part of my question, I don't remember it. I apologize.
The second part was about grant. You mean specifically for
Yes.
BEAD?
Yes. So my first, I apologize. The first part of my question was about more webinars and that sort of thing to go over the BEAD funding opportunity with the ISPs here in the state of California, so that ideally we can maximize on the build out and get as much money for the state as possible in regards to last mile projects. And then the second part of my question pertained to the window for the grant opportunities. Do you have an idea of when that's going to be opening? Because as you're aware of, here in the state of California, there's quite a bit of opportunities becoming available. And from a planning perspective, I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, and thanks for that question. So for the BEAD, the rulemaking just opened in March. We'll be taking comments and reply comments that will go through May. Then we'll be probably putting together a staff proposal that will then sort of create sort of the framework of what we're planning to do. That will also be open for comment for the BEAD program itself. I don't expect that we'll have program rules in place before third quarter of this year. Grants will, I'm going to say a grant window could possibly be open between first and second quarter of next year, but I think prior to that we'll be having other program opportunities such as the California Advanced Services Fund, such as the federal funding account. Those will be going online in terms of grant funding windows pretty shortly. So CSF, I believe we have a current date of May 1st as a deadline, but we might likely extend that. And then for the federal funding account, I believe we're talking about opening the grant window sometime in June, and that I don't know when that window will close. So as you said, there are a number of funding opportunities available. We do have webinars on our website for those, at least for the federal funding account. I think for CSF, we are doing actually a workshop on Monday. And if you'd like, I can send you the information on that so you can register. But for the BEAD, it's certainly a number of months out before we are going to be doing any webinars because we first have to establish the rules.
Thank you. You answered my question.
And Elise, I would just want to reiterate that the invitation to everyone here that the local planning workshops that we'll be doing, those are co-hosted by the Department of Technology, the Public Utilities Commission, et cetera. And that's also part of the joint planning process and an opportunity for folks, including ISPs and others, to provide, input, to the state and other entities. So really want to encourage participation in those.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I know we are making good time. We have about 10 more minutes left. I want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity now that we're all together here. Are there any additional questions or comments? Really want to benefit from the collective wisdom that we have here in the webinar? Okay, it looks like there are none. Anne, can you help me out? Is there any thing else on our agenda, or are we at a good close?
I think we're at a good close after Q&A. Is just contact us and our contact information. And I do see one question in the chat from Rodney. I'm not sure if Rodney is able to. Oh, but I see a hand from Ken too.
Hello, Ken.
Oh, hello. I just wanted to know if I could take a moment to ask about the CPUC's planned announcement for applying for broadband infrastructure account. I think this is tangential to what you're talking to, but I think it's very much related to the overall effort. And I didn't know if there was any information that you might share about that. I saw the deadline had been moved from April 1st till May 1st for that.
I can. Yes, this is Rob Osborne. That's correct. The date was moved to May 1st. I believe the map is going live today. So we might be extending that deadline a little further, given that there's only 3 weeks for people to look at the map and come up with a project. So more to come on that. But I put a link here for the CSF workshop, which is next Monday, and you can find more information on how to register for that at that link.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I will plan to attend that.
Thanks for the question, Ken. I would also note that at the regional planning workshops, really those are intended to do public engagement on the digital equity and the BEAD plans, but at each of those local and regional events, the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative team and the third-party administrator and the Public Utilities Commission will be there for some, regional broadband infrastructure planning sessions, and some additional questions can be answered there as well. Looks like, let me check the chat is, are there any other questions? Well, we'll pause for about 20 seconds. Excellent. Well, wanted to thank all of you folks for coming together on a Friday on a very critical issue. We will make these slides available to you. We will post this video, the presentation on the Broadband for All portal, and just really want to thank you for the work that your entities do to promote and provide services throughout the state, and thank you for your partnership moving forward and helping to achieve broadband for all in California. And with that, we can close.